at another event, and I got up and they introduced me, and they polite applause, and I got to the podium and somebody in the back yelled, "We can't hear you," and I said, "That's because I haven't started talking yet." It was like one of those. It was like a preemptive strike or something. It was like, "Good afternoon, welcome to the Aspen Ideas Festival, pre-festival. I guess this is the pre-festival. I'm Jeff Goldberg from the Atlantic. This is Michael Oren from the state of Israel,
across the Atlantic,
from the other side of the Atlantic,
right?
And what we're going to do this afternoon is have a discussion about small issues, the future of the Middle East, the future of the Jewish people, the future of the Muslim people.
All in an hour.
Future of Aspen.
Right. Clock it.
And we'll talk for a while, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions. Just by way of background, we've done this many times. We did this here. I think it was 5 years ago when you first became ambassador. He's not ambassador anymore, so he'll be able to tell the truth this time, or some facsimile of the truth.
There was a 17th century English aristocrat named Wooden who said that an ambassador is a man of virtue sent abroad to lie for his country.
Yeah.
He was wrong. An ambassador is a man of virtue sent abroad to lie for two countries.
Right. So
it's in the book.
Yeah, not on sale yet.
Right.
So 5 years ago, we were in this tent, and it was it wasn't memorable for anything that we said. I think it was memorable because it was the largest thunderstorm in the history of Aspen, And I mean, it got so bad. I mean, two things happened. One, it got so bad that we actually had to stop talking for 50 minutes because nobody could hear us, which many people in the audience considered a blessing, obviously. And the second thing is that if you looked outside, you would see animals lining up 2 by 2. It got so bad. So of course.
And I said, I didn't eat the hot dog.
Yeah,
I didn't eat the hot dog.
You almost lost your job, actually, because Mark Leibovich in this town reported that he ate a Christmas ham, when in fact all he did was look at the Christmas ham. No, it's true.
No.
This is the worst of Jewish politics.
The worst crisis I've had in 4 years of Washington.
But my theory of that was that God did not want us to talk about the settlements for some reason. But we're going to risk it again, and we're going to go. We're going to talk about some Middle East politics, and we're going to start. Let me start very specifically with news. With some news today, it seems as if the Prime Minister, your ex-boss, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is going to give a speech on Sunday in which he announces that Israel is going to take certain, we don't yet know exactly what, certain unilateral moves. The peace process, as you know, has completely collapsed. Early this morning, the State Department announced that Martin Indyk, the U.S. peace envoy, who will, by the way, be here next week, has resigned his job. Netanyahu has announced that he's going to take some unilateral steps. The reason this is so fortuitous is that Michael Oren is the guy who devised what's being called, or what you decided to call, Plan B. In other words, that Israel had a Plan A, which was to negotiate with the Palestinians, but if those negotiations didn't work, it couldn't simply just sit there and not do anything. The status quo was not tenable. So you devised a kind of a Plan B scenario, which involved a lot of unilateral steps. When you started floating this 6 months ago or 8 months ago, you were attacked from the right mercilessly. You were attacked from the left too, which is, I guess, your usual zone of comfort. But now it seems as if the Prime Minister may be on the verge of adopting some of your ideas. Can you talk about what the ideas that he might be moving toward?
Okay. Jeffrey.
Yes.
Shalom.
Oh.
How are you?
I'm fine,
Good to
thank
be
you.
here with everybody. My wife Sally, your wife Pam.
Yes.
Very good. Everyone here. Shalom. This was an initiative. I almost didn't get the job as ambassador because 6.5 years ago, when I got back from participating in what was then known as the CAS-led Gaza War, 2008-2009. I was there as a reserve officer. I was in a sabbatical year at Georgetown. I came back, gave a speech at Georgetown saying, quote unquote, I am the last of the standing unilateralists. And when I was nominated for ambassador, many people, particularly on the right, quoted this, saying this guy wants to bring us back to Gaza, to the Gaza withdrawal from 2005. I had participated in the Gaza withdrawal as a reserve officer in the Israeli army. Nothing was more traumatic than that. No war I've ever been was as rough as dragging Jews out of their houses in Gaza. And I did it. And I never want to go back to doing that again. But on the other hand, the status quo was not sustainable. How can we have a situation where we have control over millions of Palestinians? We're becoming increasingly isolated and facing the possibility of sanctions in the world, divisions within the American Jewish community and other Jewish communities with Israel, divisions within Israeli society. How long is this going to go on for? And after studying Palestinian politics for many decades, I had concluded that the Palestinians, for deep historical reasons for which I have great regard, but deep historical reasons, were either unwilling and or incapable of signing a two-state solution with us. I think you'll agree with me if Ehud Olmert had come back with a signed agreement in 2008, the Israeli public would have probably approved it. If Ehud Barak had come back in 2000 with a signed agreement from Camp David, from Arafat, the Israeli public would have passed it with tremendous dissension. And that I concluded that we had to take our destiny in our hands and draw our own borders. And the borders would be drawn according to several parameters. Maximum number of Jews on our side, maximum number of Palestinians on their side, maximum amount of holy places for the Jewish people on our side, maximum number of military prerogatives that will enable us to defend ourselves. But what do we get out of this? We basically erase the claim that someday Israel could be an apartheid state because we won't be ruling over millions of Palestinians anymore. We maintain ourselves as a democratic and Jewish state. We maintain our security. And we lower our exposure to the possibility of sanctions because we won't be ruling over the Palestinians anymore. Now, since then, as you said, the peace process has collapsed. The Palestinian Authority has made clear its intention to go to the UN in a few short weeks, basically, and declare Palestinian statehood unilaterally. They will declare their state on the 67 borders, and they will claim that we are illegally occupying a member state of the UN. They will then go to international courts. They'll get us sanctioned and embargoed. It's a strategic threat to the state of Israel. Unlike rockets from Hamas, that's a tactical threat. These are strategic threats. And we are sitting there with no, what I call, diplomatic iron dome, nothing to defend us. So I came out, the minute I finished with my term as ambassador, I came back to Israel and I came out with this initiative, which the Israeli press, by the way, called Plan B. You know how you say Plan B in Hebrew? Plan B. So suddenly I am now the proud owner of Plan B. And as you said, I got knocked pretty hard, mostly from the right. And now here we are 6 months later, after the collapse of the Kerry Initiative. Here Martin has resigned this morning. Palestinians have made clear their intention to go to the UN. And suddenly, right, left, center, everyone's coming out and adopted one version or another of Plan B. It actually started on the right. It started with Naftali Bennett, who said, oh, we're going to annex part of the West Bank, we're going to give the other part of the West Bank to the Palestinians for an autonomous area. But what was significant here, it's the first time a settler leader came out and said, we're not going to keep all of this. It's very significant. Yair Lapid, sort of the center-left, came out about 2 weeks ago at the Herzliya conference, and he came out with a staged Plan B. Now the Prime Minister finds himself between the right and the left. It's going to be very interesting to hear what he says on Sunday. Do
you have any insight about what he's going to say and whether that will satiate the needs of the Palestinians or the international community?
Well, I think there's a lot of fine lines to be drawn here, not just on the actual West Bank, but there are diplomatic lines you have to draw. You have to draw a line that's going to tell the Europeans, listen, you may not like this, but it's not worth sanctioning us for it. We have to tell the Israeli people that these are the lines that we can send our kids out to defend. It's a very important thing in Israel. Without that sense of national cohesion and purpose, we are very exposed. And this is the big and, I think we have to draw a line that the Palestinians don't like. It's very important they don't like the line. Why? We want to keep the door open to a two-state solution. We want to be able to say, here are some territories that we're not going to annex, and it's going to be open to you to negotiate for these if you walk through the door and we have the negotiations. Maybe it'll take another generation. And look how long it took for France and Germany and England and France to get along. It may take a while. But in between, we can build on an extensive amount of coexistence that is going now in fields of environmental control, in trade, in security even. We can build on it. And we can create a de facto two-state situation, not a solution, but a situation in which we have a border dispute. And there are dozens of border disputes in the world. I don't know if you know this, but America has 3 of them with Canada. And beware, because every time you try to solve it by force, you get beaten by the Canadians. So they're tough. We'll have a border dispute. and we'll keep the door open to negotiating that border dispute in the future.
But you're building big assumptions into this, and the assumption is that the Palestinians will somehow go, all right, we don't like it, but we're going to live with this. What prevents them from returning to an uprising, returning to violence? What prevents them from saying, look, okay, fine, you've just ceded us 60% of the West Bank, or I'm making up a number, but you're still occupying illegally because we're still going to the UN, you're still occupying 40%, so we're still going to try to get you sanctioned.
Exactly what they're going to do. And it's important, again, it's important that they don't like it. Don't get me wrong, this is not risk-free. Anything we do bears risk. If we had a two-state solution, and we had to take the Palestinian state, and I don't know how many settlers we'd have to rip out of their homes to do this, with what's going on in Iraq, which is just on the other side of Jordan, not far away from the West Bank, it's a huge risk. It's a huge risk. There's always risk. I'm trying to find a solution, or at least a direction which minimizes our risk. Yes, the Palestinians will come at us. They'll say we're still occupiers. They'll say they're going to try to sanction us. I think if we are not in control, we're not ruling over actual Palestinians, where we can say to the Europeans, they're very concerned about our occupation, we're not occupying these people anymore. And I've spent a lot of time on track 2 type of conversations with European diplomats, American diplomats, Canadian diplomats, to try to find that golden mean, where we can say we have ended the rule of Palestinians, we've kept the door open for negotiations. This is not a perfect solution, but a two-state situation where there's a border dispute is better than a unilaterally declared Palestinian state that is sanctioning us. That's all.
But there's no possible way that Israel is going to remove its troops from the Jordan Valley. I mean,
not under the Plan B that I would envision, we would signal to the Palestinians that this is not a permanent situation.
And how many settlers would you pull out?
I don't think in terms of pulling out, because of the enduring trauma in my own heart of the Gaza withdrawal in 2005. I think in terms of relocating the settlements. Now, we are not talking about vast distances here. In most cases, you're talking about moving a settlement 2 miles down the road. And the idea will be to try to convince those outlying settlements that we cannot include within our border, and we can embrace the vast majority of the settler population, is to be able to convince them, all right, you can stay in this settlement. The settlement's just going to move down the road. And we can do it. Physically, it's possible, and technologically, it's possible. We have to make our case.
Let's take one step back to the negotiations that have pretty comprehensively failed, at least for the moment. The American view, and I think we have some insight about what Martin Indyk felt, and we've heard John Kerry on this, and we kind of understand where Obama is. They believe that, yes, that Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority, did not take various courageous leaps that he should have taken, and the Palestinians are dysfunctional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that caused the breakdown was continued commitment by the Netanyahu government to expanding settlements, including settlements outside of areas that everybody knows secretly will be part of Israel in a final settlement, in a final negotiated settlement. So, I mean, I want to hear, and I think the audience will want to hear, you don't work for the government anymore, you don't have to defend it, but I mean, is the Obama administration wrong? I mean, when they're dividing up blame, they're looking at a kind of a 70-30 or 75-25 split.
Yeah. But it's a 75-30 split between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Where does the American blame come in? I think there were profound mistakes made early in the first term of the Obama administration back in 2009 that neither side was able to extricate themselves from those difficulties. The primary difficulty, and I'm just reading Hillary Clinton's book, and she acknowledges this difficulty. It came as a great relief to me that I'm not the only one saying this, was that the Obama administration disavowed the existence of the Bush-Sharon letter of 2004. Now we're getting into like the nitty-gritty of a Middle East diplomacy. 2004, President Bush wrote a letter to then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon saying that we know that if a two-state solution comes about, that the major settlement blocks, which are comprised by 80% of the settlement population, and the Jewish neighborhoods of Jerusalem that were built beyond the 1967 lines will be part of the Jewish state. And what this letter did was to create diplomatic space for Israel, because it enabled us to say, hey, we're building settlements, we're just not building beyond the blocks. But it also created space for the Palestinians. And Mahmoud Abbas, if he was up here, he'd tell you this, just what I'm telling you now. The minute you disavowed that letter, anytime you built an apartment in a long-standing Jewish neighborhood of Jerusalem, and Israelis have no idea where the 67 lines are in Jerusalem. It's a complete myth. We grew up in between two areas that have been part of Jordan before 67. Our own kids have no idea that was the case. The minute you build one of those apartments, then you've built a settlement. And the Palestinian president cannot be more Palestinian or less Palestinian than the president of the United States. So he's got to say that stops the process too. So everybody got denied their latitude by disavowing the Bush-Sharon letter. And we're still digging ourselves. What caused Kerry to say poof in his testimony before the Senate Relations Committee? This was in April. He said that we have this negotiations going, and then Israel announced a major settlement construction project, and poof. By the way, there's no word for poof in Hebrew, and I had to go on radio and explain what poof actually meant in Hebrew. The poof was 400 or 600 units, apartment buildings, in a neighborhood known as Gilo. Ask 98% of Israelis if they think Gilo is a settlement, or even if Gilo is located beyond the 67 lines, they'll have absolutely no idea. But that poof was not created by the state of Israel. That poof was created by American foreign policy, and it was a poof failure.
Okay, fine. Your answer is fine, but I want you to answer my question.
I would not have said that as ambassador. Now you got it.
No, but answer given the realities that the Obama administration constructed, the Obama administration also constructed other realities for Israel. In other words, it remained Israel's foremost diplomatic protector, foremost military protector, foremost supplier of. So okay, fine. I accept that premise, but now go to the question, which is, given that reality, why did Israel have to go and understanding what might happen if these 400 or 600 apartments were built, why did it have to go do it anyway? Okay. I mean, everybody makes decisions based on the reality around them, not just on this principle.
Okay, I'm going to apologize to anybody who doesn't get up in the morning and spend their entire day studying Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy.
We're going to move on to something else in a minute.
This gets into the minutia. Building beyond the blocks, because that for Israelis is a controversial issue. Building within the blocks is much less controversial, and building in Jerusalem is not controversial at all. P.S. Under Israeli law, the Prime Minister of Israel, the government of Israel, has no ability to stop building anywhere in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was formally annexed by the Israeli government in July of 1967, and it is sovereign Israeli territory. The government of Israel has no more authority to stop a housing project in Gilo than the President of the United States has to stop a housing project in Aspen. And you have to understand that. The administration put a demand on the Israeli government that no Israeli government, left, right, up, down, could ever meet. And that created a terrible situation right from the get-go. Now, your question, do you build beyond the blocks? I think building beyond the blocks is terribly counterproductive. And I think it's sticking, as they say in Hebrew, sticking your finger in the eye of the president. And in response to the American very swift recognition of the Hamas-Fatah unity government, the Israeli government announced a large building program, which they said was a Zionist response. I don't believe a Zionist response is to get the American government furious at you and deepen your isolation internationally. And they built some 1,600 units in the blocks in Jerusalem, but 40 of the units were beyond the blocks. And from my point of view, the 40 units beyond the blocks was a gratuitous sticking of the finger in the eye of the administration. It was unnecessary.
Of the Obama administration.
Okay. Yeah, and hurtful.
I want to move to another fun subject, the Iranian nuclear program, in a second. But since you brought up President Obama, and now that you're a free man, you don't have to tell us that President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu have a deeply useful and constructive relationship. Can you give us some insight into? I mean, these are two men who have.
They go on vacation together.
Yeah, no, I know. They're in Aspen right now. They have a place actually in Basalt. They don't want all the attention.
Wow.
No two leaders on the world stage have probably a more intense relationship over the last half dozen years than these two. But give us some insight about these meetings that you were in. Give us some insight about the dynamic. And you know, they do seem to respect each other on a certain level. They respect each other's intellects. They respect each other's political skills. But
This is about Iran or about
No.
okay,
I'm going to go to I'm going to go to Iran, but I want your. You've been in the Oval Office. I don't know how many times with the Prime Minister and without, and you probably have some insight about the way this relationship has worked or not worked.
I think you have to distinguish between what goes on in the office and what goes on outside the office. What goes on in the office is, I'm going to sound like an ambassador again. It's very friendly, it's laid back, it's self-effacing, it's constructive, it's substantive, and then you go out and you read in the newspaper the next morning that you've been snubbed or there's been some big disagreement, and half of what you read in the newspapers is somebody's spin, and different parties have different interests in spinning it in different ways. In the famous lecture of Bibi, infamous lecture when Netanyahu
Tell
gave
people what that is in case they don't know.
This was on May 21st, 2011. After Obama came out and talked about that the basis of the peace process would be the 67 borders with swaps, which was a very problematic position from Israel perspective because that had been the Palestinian position in the negotiations, and Obama made it the American position. And again, it was a question of latitude. It greatly constricted our latitude. It constricted the Palestinian latitude as well. It means they had to start negotiating, for example, from the Western Wall or from the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway, which skirts that border. So it really constricted our latitude. Netanyahu was not happy with this, and he came to Washington 2 days later and had a press conference in the Oval Office in which was widely interpreted by the press as the Prime Minister lecturing the President.
It was interpreted that way because he was lecturing the President.
He actually wasn't.
I was watching.
Where'd you go to college? Do you know what a lecture is?
Yeah, I know what no, this was a lecture.
Did you take notes?
This was a lecture. Well, no, the President was not taking notes. It's true. He was staring at it.
Involved in writing that lecture, I'll tell you that every effort was made not to lecture the President. That's what I kept on saying. The Palestinians have to understand this. The Palestinians have to understand that. He didn't say the President has to understand this. It was a tone. Okay, I get it. How did we get onto this?
You're just trying to get off. You're just trying to figure out a way off.
This is an interesting story. So it's finished, and the President and the Prime Minister wander off onto the South Lawn and start strolling around arm in arm. And part of my job is to walk behind these guys while they stroll arm in arm, and they're having this completely congenial conversation. And at the end, Obama gives Bibi a little hug and says, "Goodbye, my friend." And then we went back to Blair House and found out that something of a major manure pile had hit the fan, and we were in the midst of a crisis. If you had asked me, getting into the sedan back to the Blair House, if we were on the verge of a major crisis, I would have said crazy. Just strolled around the South Lawn and talked amicably. So obviously there were interests at play, perhaps on both sides, in spinning this as a crisis. And we spent the next 2 days trying to lower temperatures around because the President had a major speech in front of AIPAC 2 days later. And I think by that time we managed to get through it. But my point is that optics and reportage sometimes do not reflect the reality that goes in behind the room. At the end of the day, Jeff, everybody gets it. What do we all get? We get that for Israel, there's no substitute for the United States. As you said, the United States is our diplomatic shield. The United States is our defense supporter. The United States is our greatest and sometimes our only ally in the world, it seems like. And there's no substitute for Israel for the United States. For the United States, look what's going on. How many allies are there out there? How many allies do you have in the Middle East? A year and a half ago, I accompanied Obama to Jerusalem, and he gets up on a stage, and there's 2,500 Israeli students out on the stage, on the audience, waving his American flags and cheering him. And I'm thinking, where else in the Middle East can the President of the United States do this today? Could he do it in Cairo? Could he do it in Syria? Could he do it in Iraq? That's it. We are what you got. And we're a pretty damn good ally. And we got an army that's, twice as big as the French and British armies combined. And we're unabashedly pro-American. So whether we like it or not, we are in this together.
But I'll get to the Iran piece, but you've prompted something. One of the big worries, and I think a part of your job that you found you didn't realize was going to be such a big job, was managing Israel's relationship with the American Jewish community. In particular, the majority of American Jews who voted for Obama. I mean, because Obama...
78 the first term, 70 the second.
Yeah, I mean, Obama got, in any white community,
100%.
Obama got, did better in the Jewish community than any other place. And I know this from talking to you during this period, and I know this from watching closely. There is a feeling has crept in from the center to the left of the American Jewish community that Israel is drifting not only to the right, but kind of away in terms of values on the religious side, on the issues of Palestinian human rights. The American Jewish community is becoming more and more universalized, maybe more and more liberal. Israel seems to be going in another direction. Maybe Obama is reflecting in his arguments with Netanyahu what the majority of American Jews feel about what Israel should do. I mean, talk about this for a minute. I mean, is that an existential worry for Israel? That one day it's going to turn around and it's going to look behind it and it's going to find that American Jews are either apathetic or borderline hostile?
It's a strategic, it's an issue of a paramount strategic concern for Israel. I'm going to hesitate to say it's existential.
We'll get to existential next.
Existential, we'll talk about Iran and poof. That's existential. Listen, the relationship beyond the spiritual connection, beyond the deep historical bonds that tie us together as the Jewish people, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. That is our raison d'etre as a nation. So we are the nation state of Jews, whether they're in Aspen or they're in Paris or in the Ukraine. If there is disaffection, if there is distancing between Israel and a large segment of the American Jewish community, because you have to recognize the fact that there is a burgeoning section of the American Jewish community which is actually more to the right and more religious. That's the religious component of the American Jewish community, which is growing. New York has had a positive Jewish growth rate for the last 3 years, which is the first time in 30 years, and that's because of Orthodox families in New York. And they're in a different place politically, in a different place in their relationship with Israel. It's an issue of, from my perspective, of paramount national security beyond the spiritual security issues. It's a simple syllogism. If the U.S.-Israel relationship is vital for Israel's security and American Jewry is vital to the United States, then our relationship with American Jewry is a security interest for the state of Israel. How do we preserve it? And there were, as you know, there were many challenges, both from the right and the left. No thunder.
It's the Iranians.
Okay. Much press was given to J Street. We were talking about it earlier with some people here, and what was happening on the left-wing side of the American Jewish community. But less attention was given to the right-wing part of the American Jewish community that regarded American Jewish mainstream organizations like AIPAC as too left-wing. So the community was moving in all different directions. But
beyond Sheldon Adelson, how big a factor is that in the American Jewish community? No. I'm not making a joke. I mean, he has disproportionate weight because of his money. But I mean, how big a faction is that?
It is a significant voice in American Jewry with power. It doesn't get the press attention. It's not as quote unquote sexy as some of the people on the left wing. But you're very sexy, the people on the left wing. But it's there, and it exerts a powerful influence, and the Israeli ambassador has to navigate all this and try to hold it all together, and the way you do this is to try to broaden the tent as much as possible, get everybody in the tent, and get them to agree on some very fundamental parameters. Israel has a right to exist, for starters, as a sovereign Jewish state. Israel has a right to defend itself as a sovereign Jewish state. These things are not taken for granted in parts of the American Jewish community. Israel is a democracy. It's one of our greatest accomplishments. We've managed to be one of the few countries in the world that has never known a second of non-democratic governance in the face of impossible odds. And the Israeli people make a decision. You may not like that decision, but at least respect the fact that Israel is a democracy. Have that as a starting point. Understand that when we vote for a government, we're basically, that is existential. Going to an Israeli polling booth is existential. We have to decide a government that may determine the survival of our families. Just respect it. You may not agree with our decision, but respect it. These are the parameters. And if you can maintain that, and no small task, then you've kept up a big tent.
We're going to go to questions soon, but there's two other subjects, the Iran subject, and then, of course, there's the future of the Middle East subject. So we'll do them in 5 minutes each, if we can. On Iran, we're coming toward an inflection point. We're coming to the end of this first round of negotiations between mainly the U.S. and Iran, the P5+1, and all these other countries. The Iranians have not yet put anything on the table that Obama or the French certainly could take back to their own people and say, look, they're actually dismantling their program. Yeah. Just spin this out for another.
Good choice. Good choice.
Spin it like a centrifuge, and take us.
Very enriching.
Take us to things. He'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen. Take us to. What you think might happen and what might be the Israeli response to what might be happening. And do it quickly.
In a nuclear-enabled Iran poses not one but 3 existential threats to Israel. It's important to understand this. There's the threat that they're going to develop a device, stick it on one of the ICBMs that they have, and ICBMs only have one purpose, and that's to carry nuclear warheads. They have them. Other existential threats that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, so they get the capabilities, the terrorists get the capabilities, and you don't have to worry about an ICBM, you got to worry about a ship container. Thirdly, once Iran gets military nuclear capabilities, Egypt gets them, Turkey gets them, Saudi Arabia buys it off the shelf from the Saudis, from the Pakistanis. The whole neighborhood becomes this profoundly unstable nuclear neighborhood, and we won't be worrying about chemical arsenals in some unstable state, we're worrying about nuclear arsenals. And so Israel's margin for error on the Iranian nuclear program is exactly 0. The United States has more maneuverability. You may notice America's a big country. It's far away from the Middle East. It's not threatened with national annihilation. America has the biggest military capabilities in the world. Big revelation here, guys. We do not have strategic bombers. We do not have aircraft carriers. All right, big difference. So America can afford to play around a bit. With all that, the French are demanding the dismantling of a large number of centrifuges. You know why? Because the French are in rocket range. Makes a big difference on your frame of mind. Big difference. If Aspen were in rocket range of the Iranians, you'd have a different idea about the Iranian nuclear program too. And so they're demanding dismantling. The Iranians said, we're not going to dismantle, we're going to double the number of centrifuges they have. They got 19,000, they want something like 50,000. So I don't know how this works out. Then there's the other variable, which is the US Congress, which is not going to back down on the sanctions so quickly unless they're convinced that this is a real deal. So
do you think there's any chance for diplomatic success? Obama himself has put it at less than 50%. So.
Yeah, he tends to do that with the peace process too.
Yeah.
He says he was being optimistic when he said that, and he was. I don't give it a high credibility. It's going to be a very tough call, because if America's position is if they do not give up their nuclear program, and even if you negotiate for another 6 months, and the Congress I don't think is going to hold fire for 6 months on escalating sanctions, you're going to be in a situation where the principle of all options are on the table, the possibility of a credible military strike is going to have to find some type of realistic expression. From Israel's perspective, when Secretary Kerry gets up in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and says, we want a breakout distance of between 12 and 14 months. That's the distance in time between the time that the Iranians decide that they want a nuclear weapon and they actually put one together. And it's, by the way, a very amorphous type of estimation, because we don't know how far along they are in building the device, because the interim agreement does not inspect the military laboratories where this is being done. They could have one already, for all we know, in which case they could get a nuclear device in 6 weeks. But he wants between 12 and 14 months. That's good for the United States. For Israel, it's very problematic.
come to this last point, and you could fold Iran back into this, I think. You just said something that struck me. You said, America's very far from the Middle East. In fact, we're not as far as we'd like to think,
Right.
9/11 being the operative example. But even today, a president who was elected to do this one big thing, which is to get America out of Iraq,
Right.
finds himself having to go back to Iraq. You wrote a very, very good book on, a very broad, sweet book on the history of American engagement.
Now available at famously reduced prices.
Famously reduced prices. $2.99.
They will pay you to buy this.
But you have tracked this relationship over 200 years. You do have a president who would very much like not to be engaged in the Middle East. We're at an amazing moment in the history of the Middle East where the 100-year order that was established by the British and French after World War I is collapsing literally in front of our eyes. The line dividing Syria and Iraq no longer exists in any meaningful way. Put this in, take everything together and sort of say, what should be the American response to the collapse of this order? There are a lot of people who are arguing that all of a sudden America has this great common interest with the Iranians, because the Sunni fundamentalists seem to be scarier at the moment than the Shia fundamentalists. So I mean, should there be an attempt by the United States to align itself with Iran against a jihadist threat? And obviously every American understands the nature of the jihadist threat.
Okay, that's about 5 questions.
Yeah, no, but just and you have 1 minute.
First of all, as you know, I give a lot of credit to what's called the Sykes-Picot Order that was made in April of 1916. The amazing thing about the Sykes-Picot Order, where the British and the French divided up the Middle East, they created Syria, they created Iraq, is that it's lasted this long. 100 years is not a bad run for an international order. The Treaty of the Congress of Vienna in 1815 lasted for 100 years in Europe. It was a pretty good run. Not bad. And what has been interesting about the Middle East since the outbreak of the Arab Spring in 2011 is the degree to which the warring parties have battled over the actual states created by the Europeans. They're battling over Syria, battling about Iraq. We are witness to history this week. This week was the time when the border between Iraq and Syria for the first time disappeared. This is the end of the Sykes-Picot Order. And we were talking earlier whether you can even talk about a Middle East anymore. The Middle East that extends to Pakistan, expands to, the Middle East was a term developed, coined by an American in 1902, Alfred Thayer Mann, to denote the area between the Near East and the Far East, because that's where ships had to go. All right? It's changed all the time. You go to... We did it! Yes!
I'm not sure what that is. That's not that. That's an actual attack, by the way. Yeah.
Calmly get up to your seats. File into there's a shelter under here. It's amazing. Which question was I on now? Before I was so rudely bombed.
The question is, President Obama calls you up. He read your book.
Yeah.
He says, "What do I do about this? How do I limit the fallout from the Middle East? How do I protect the United States of America and its allies from this cosmic conflict between Shia and Sunni?"
Where to begin? Some of us are a generation where we remember the retreat from Vietnam in 1975. Remember pushing the helicopters over the side into the ocean? You could leave Vietnam in 1975 and be pretty confident that the Viet Cong weren't going to follow you to Aspen. There is no going home from the Middle East. Drive it from your minds. The Middle East is going to stay part of American lives, it's going to stay part of Israeli lives, certainly for the foreseeable future. And the question is, then how do you best protect yourselves? How do you preserve your interests? And your interests, first and foremost, are your family's securities. America, over the course of 200 years, Americans have been looking for a Middle Eastern George Washington. The phrase first appears at the beginning of the 19th century. And Americans tended to look at the Middle East as sort of a cracked mirror, an image of itself that just needed a little fixing. And you'd have the United States of the Middle East. Well, it's not going to happen. And the George Washingtons America tends to leave in place, become like a Maliki. And they're not quite George Washingtons. And everyone gets very disappointed with them because they happen to be typical Middle Eastern rulers. And the idea is to disabuse, I think, Americans, if I say this humbly, yourself of this, and say, okay, what are the core interests here? And how do we pursue them? I strongly believe, I emphatically believe, that striking an alliance with Iran is not in America's interest. Iran, again, is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. The Sunnis pose a tactical threat. They may have rockets, they may have suicide bombers, but we have responses, and Israel has proven that we can survive these things. The Shiite radical arc that begins in Tehran and ends in Beirut is armed with not only 170 long-range rockets, but it has access to military and nuclear capabilities. It is a dimension of threat which is not comparable in any way to that posed by the Sunni extremists. That is not in any way to diminish the threat, but it's of a different magnitude entirely. Do not make a pact with Iran. Iran killed hundreds of American troops to get you out of Iraq. Why would you want to make a pact to bring Iran back in there? It defies any explanation. Having said that, I think that as painful as it has been for President Obama, and let's all be honest with ourselves, America is engaged militarily in Iraq right now. It's got boots on the ground, it's got airplanes in the air, it's engaged. And I think it's the right decision. It's a right decision not because America can impact the outcome of the great millennial struggle going on between Sunnis and Shiites there. America's not going to impact the outcome. But the fact that America is involved sends a message. It sends a message to folks in Russia. It sends a message to people in China that America is not withdrawing from the world. I think America, it is saying that America does not recoil from pursuing a military course if it has to. And you do have assets that you have to protect there, including, I think, the largest embassy in the American world with 5,000 people in it. You've got to protect that. You think that the scenes of the helicopters going off the embassy in Saigon was bad. And I think it's the right call, painful as it is. I understand it's very painful for this president. But that's my answer.
We're going to go to questions. If you raise your hand, there are some mics running around the audience. Why don't we go right over there to start? And then the next one will be over here. Can't really see. And let's make these in the form of a question if we can, because we want to get a lot in.
It seems to me that the Palestinians have occupied the moral high ground in this conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And I'd like to know how this has happened. After all, the Americans settled this continent and displaced the indigenous people. The British settled this continent. The British also settled the country I come from and displaced the indigenous people. More recently, China has occupied Tibet, is displacing the people, and more recently, Russia has occupied Crimea. How has this happened? The second part of my question
Can we just do that one? Is that okay? All right. I want to get a lot of people. No.
Why is there a different standard for Israel?
Is that a double standard? Is that what you're asking?
That's right.
Okay.
There's actually a triple standard.
What's the triple standard?
The triple standard is there's a standard for what non-democratic, non-Western societies do to one another. Look at the 160,000 people killed in Syria. How much press attention does that really get? I'm going to say this in the most pedestrian way can I get. If Israel unfortunately kills some Palestinians in the West Bank, one or two, that is going to be front page news. But 1,000 people die in Syria, it's not going to be front page news. There's one standard. There's a double standard of what democracies do. I am writing a book about my period in Washington, and I was writing recently about the flotilla incident of 2010, where Israeli naval SEALs intercepted a flotilla trying to get into Gaza with armed people on board. And they came on board armed, the Navy SEALs, with paint guns, and they were beaten up and stabbed and shot. And they defended themselves, and they killed 9 Turks. That was the front page news. The New York Times had an entire op-ed section with Michael Chabon and Tony Jute, Olav Shalom, writing against Israel in the most egregious ways. It went on for days. That same week, American drones killed 24 Afghani civilians. It made the back page, this. Where was all the American Jewish outcry about that? Nothing, zero. So that's the double standard. But she's right. When it comes to Israel, there is a different standard. We'll deal with it. The fact of the matter is, I'm kind of proud of it. I'm proud that we hold ourselves to a different standard. I don't like the examples. I would disagree with the examples you give. We are an indigenous people. We are indigenous to our homeland. We didn't do it. We didn't do it to support a colonial empire. We fought against the colonial empire, and 20% of our population is Arabs and not displaced, and they're in the Knesset and they're in the Supreme Court, and they're in our lives. It doesn't mean that we don't have to fight against discrimination. We do, but none of the colonial examples you can adduce from history applies to us. We are native, and this is our nation state. The land. One of the reasons that the settlements are so controversial is that they're located in our tribal lands. You know, Bethlehem, Hebron, they're in the Bible. Haifa isn't. Big problem.
But, ma'am, I'm going to go over here. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I was here last year, Jeffrey, when I think you moderated Nicholas Burns and a retired Air Force general from the Israeli Air Force who...
Amos Yadlin, yeah.
Yeah. And he discussed Iran at that time. He said the diplomacy was a waste of time. It would never work, and Iran was just buying time to build a bomb. And he gave the distinct impression that Israel would give us a little time because they didn't want to bring the whole world down on them, but then they would go in and not eliminate.
Hold the mic to your mouth.
They would go in, not eliminate it, but delay it for years.
They meaning Israel.
Israel. And so I expected that to happen the first half of this year. Why hasn't it happened?
Yeah, why haven't you bombed Iran yet?
Go home, turn on your radios. I was dying to say that for years.
Oh, good.
Every time I
Glad
got on
we
the
could
news,
satisfy you.
every time they say, okay, when is Israel going to bomb Iran? I said, don't make any plans for next Tuesday. No travel. I just wanted to say that one time. Listen,
No, are you as down on the possibility of diplomacy as some of your colleagues in Israel?
It's not that Israel has the greatest stake in a diplomatic outcome. We have the most to lose. We have the most skin in the game. And understand that any action that Israel would take against Iran, we have capabilities. We don't have American capabilities. We could set Iran back. Israel undertook the Osiris reactor attack in 1981 with the assumption that we would set that Iraqi nuclear program back 1 year. That was it. Iraq still doesn't have a nuclear weapon. So, that's the calculus you have in a Jewish state living in a tough neighborhood. But understand that the problem with any military action against Iran is not the military action against Iran. It's not D-Day. It's D-Day plus 1, D-Day plus 2, D-Day plus 3. It's the 170,000 rockets pointed at our neighborhood. And Iran has moved to arm Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations as sort of to keep us in perpetual check. So they know that if we take any action against Iran, the deterrence will not be from Iran. They have a couple of hundred Shihab missiles that they can fire us, and we have Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 anti-missile defense. It's what's going to hit us from Lebanon and how we have to respond to that. And we may have to respond to that not just in the air, but on the ground. And if it's on the ground, it's involving collateral damage to Lebanese and Palestinian civilians, and that gets into the Security Council. It is very, very, very complicated. So we have the greatest interest in resolving this diplomatically, but a diplomatic solution that leaves us with a situation where Iran can break out with very short period of time in a room less than this size, put together a nuclear weapon where no one's going to know it, because that's what the Pakistanis did, that's what the Indians did, right? That's what the North Koreans did, and we'll be facing multiple existential questions. That is going to be that is not a diplomatic solution for us. That is a recipe for Israel's dissolution, and that's going to be a real problem.
Over here, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you got that? Okay. Well, somebody asked a question. Go ahead.
I was disappointed by your statement that there's no upside in the United States forming an alliance with Iran. Certainly your analysis makes sense that Iran is a lot riskier than any threat that the Sunnis pose. But what's Iran's long-term gain, and is there any possibility that Iran and the United States can cooperate for peace in the region? Because that really would be an upside worth of cheating, if it's possible.
But you have your position proceeds from the assumption that Iran is at base a rational cost-benefit analysis type regime. And here there's a fundamental disagreement that's gone on in this country for a long time. I followed it over more than a decade. And I come down on it very clearly, unequivocally on the side that Iran is not a rational cost-benefit type regime. That Iran is, I take Islam very seriously. I take the Islam of Iran very seriously. It's not just an expression of interests and fears. And Iran not only has regional aspirations, it has global aspirations. You know, I understand you talked to Mike Mullen before, and I have nothing but the highest regard and affection for him. He was a wonderful commander. And there are only two militaries in the world that divide the world into global theaters of operations: the US military and the Iranian military. They have a European command. They have a South American command. You're dealing with a very different type of regime. This is a regime that plots a terrorist attack in downtown Washington, D.C. This is a regime that blows up a Jewish community center and kills dozens of people in South America. This is not Belgium, and understanding that. And if you think Iran wants peace together with the United States in the Middle East, I mean, I can argue with it. I will advance a lot of arguments against it. But there are a lot of people in think tanks in Washington who think differently. I think they're emphatically, profoundly wrong, and that is my answer. I think right now Iran is gaining greatly from the situation in Iraq. They're moving forces in there. They're gaining influence from the Iraqi public, certainly the Shiite public that may have been a little bit standoffish about getting involved with the Ayatollahs. I think that they may come out of this even without an American cooperation coming out ahead.
Let's go over here, and then we'll go over there. Over here.
Yes. My name's Larry Gelman, and I wanted to change the subject, if I could, to something that's been in the current news, both about the kidnappings of the three teenagers in the West Bank and also about the Presbyterian Church here in the United States voting to divest their holdings in companies that they believe aid in the growth of settlements in the West Bank. There's been widespread, very loud, and very unified opposition to, I mean, a show of unity and solidarity with the families and with the missing young men, and also widespread condemnation with the anti-Semitism word used by a lot of legacy Jewish agencies to describe what the Presbyterians did. Others, including Jews, will say this is simply reaping the harvest of 47 years of occupation, and these groups are responding to the facts on the ground.
I know there's a question in here.
The question is, how much of what you think is going on is related to anti-Semitism, and how much of it do you think is related to simply the fact that it's a response to what is actually happening on the ground in Israel?
Okay, so we have a little bit of apples and oranges here, because we start off by talking about the kidnapping of the three Israeli teenagers 2 weeks ago now. And this has profoundly shaken Israel. It has received far less press attention here. I also serve as CNN's Middle East analyst today, and I think I had one interview on the kidnapping. It didn't get a great amount of press coverage here, but it's around the clock in Israel. I think that we were talking about this earlier with Jeff. It's a watershed issue for Israel, because we released 1,027 Palestinian terrorists to get Gilad Shalit free a few years ago. I think this is a kidnapping too far. I don't think Israel's going to negotiate in the same way. And also the fact that these three young people come from a certain segment of the Israeli population, which was the most opposed to the Gilad Shalit exchange. These are national religious people, the people who wear a knitted kippah. And we hope that these kids are alive and we can release them. I don't think Israel's going to negotiate in the same way. I think we've just reached our threshold on that, and it is going to be a watershed. About the Presbyterian, for those of you who don't know, the Presbyterian Church, after many years of debate,
One branch of the Presbyterian Church USA.
I met with the delegations and tried to convince them otherwise. Voted to divest from from American companies that do business with Israel in the West Bank, and this is a first ever for the Presbyterians. It is particularly painful for me, because if you do read that book that's available for very reduced prices now. It's called Power, Faith, and Fantasy. You'll know that the Presbyterians were the first Zionists in the United States. Well before the Jews became Zionists, it was the Presbyterians. And Israel owes an historic debt to the Presbyterians of the United States. Woodrow Wilson was the person who basically got the British to issue the Balfour Declaration because he was the grandson and son of Presbyterian ministers and believed very deeply that the Jews have a right to restore their homeland. The fact that the Presbyterians are now the first Main Street church to divest from us is very painful. So it would be facile to say, okay, this is because of 47 years of occupation and settlement building. But to do that, you have to ignore 2 full offers by Israeli governments to the Palestinians to have independent states in just almost the entire West Bank, half of Jerusalem, all of Gaza, that were turned down by the Palestinians. You have to ignore, even under the Netanyahu government, 12 months of moratorium of settlement freeze to which the Palestinians did not avail themselves. You have to ignore the 1,000 Israeli dead from suicide bombers during the Second Intifada. You have to ignore the fact that the West Bank was used not once but twice to wage wars of national destruction against the Jewish people. Think about that. It's never happened to wage a war against national destruction against the United States. Has never happened. But the West Bank was used twice. Now, to ignore all that and then divest, but not divest from China, and not divest from Russia, and not divest from countries that commit egregious human rights abuses, but to single out Israel in a way that's ahistorical is anti-Semitic. Period.
I think we have time for one more question over here. Yes. Make it a good question, because your last one.
Well, with Iraq and what's going on right now, you've said America is right now in military position and acting in Iraq. What is the UN's position? What's Israel's position? If Maliki doesn't stay in there for another couple more weeks, what do you think your country's doing in order to protect your interests, and how are you working to align with other partners?
All right, remember, keep in mind, I don't speak for the government anymore. I'm speaking for me and Jeff.
No, you're not.
And what I'm going to say is harsh, and perhaps a little edgy. But if we have to choose the lesser of evils here, the lesser evil is the Sunnis over the Shiites. For the reason
You're
I
not
mentioned
speaking
before.
for me.
Okay, it's a lesser evil. It's an evil, believe me, it's a terrible evil. Again, they've just taken out 1,700 former Iraqi soldiers and shot them in a field. But who are they fighting against? They're fighting against the proxy with Iran that's complicit in the murder of 160,000 people in Syria. You can just do the math. And again, one side is armed with suicide bombers and rockets. The other side has access to military nuclear capabilities. So from Israel's perspective, if someone's got, if there's got to be an evil that's going to prevail, let the Sunni evil prevail. And again, I'm speaking entirely for myself. As the Sykes-Picot system breaks down, Israel has got to guard its borders. We have built a high-tech fence very quickly along our Egyptian border. We're building a high-tech fence along our Syrian border. We have a primary interest in maintaining the stability of Jordan. Our security border is not the Jordanian-Israeli border, it's the Jordanian-Iraqi border. Jordan, among other things, is what keeps that mess out of our backyards. And we'll be working to shore up Jordan. And I know when I was in Washington and working on the Hill, I was always working to shore up Jordan. Very important for us. We're going to have to hunker down for a while. One of the most amazing things, I understand we're coming to an end. I was, a couple people saw me in Chicago, Lee, this week. When I was in Chicago, briefing you on the depressing situation in the Middle East, my wife was getting into a helicopter and helicoptering down to Masada to see a high-tech Cirque du Soleil type production of La Traviata. Right? 7,000 people with great images projected up on Masada. And this is all going on in Israel. There's this fabulous food in Tel Aviv. People are on the beaches. And every once in a while, you got to stop and think that if Sally got into a car at Masada and drove 4 hours northward, she'd be in downtown Damascus. If you got in a car and drove 6 hours southward, you'd be in Tahrir Square. If you drove an hour eastward, you'd be in Mafraq, which is the second largest city in Jordan today, and it's a refugee camp, size of San Francisco. If you drove 3.5 hours from La Traviata, Masada, you'd be in the front of the fighting in Iraq. Right? This is all going. Israel would be an extraordinary country if it was happening in Colorado. But the fact that it's happening in the middle of this insanity, this madness, has got to be one of our towering experiences. Our towering achievements. I'm sounding like an ambassador again. I'm sorry. I get sometimes you just can't wean yourself of this stuff. But it really is extraordinary that this is going on. But we have to be aware while we're watching La Traviata that there's real La Traviata out there, and that we're going to have to defend ourselves in all sorts of conventional and non-conventional ways.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Michael. That was great. We're all